They created a military program meant to crush even the toughest fighters in the galaxy. A human girl moved through it as if it were a basic warm-up. So, let me tell you about Krever. Yes, I know, it sounds like someone choking on gravel, but that was truly his name. Krever Malak, to be exact. And if you are wondering whether he lived up to that harsh, bone-grinding name, you have no idea how much. This individual, an absolute symbol of rigid military discipline, had spent 43 cycles, roughly 60 Earth years, reshaping soft, entitled offspring from every corner of the galaxy into something that could reasonably be called soldiers. The Galactic Military Academy on Station Primus was his territory. It was his command, his realm, and, if we are being honest, his personal testing ground for endurance. Krever was not just another instructor. No. He was the instructor. The one summoned when an ambassador's child required their inflated confidence carefully dismantled. The one contacted when an entire species grew too relaxed, too protected, too convinced that advanced weapons and shield technology meant they did not need real combat skill. He was a Christian, which, for those unfamiliar, meant he stood nearly 8 feet tall, had 4 arms, each strong enough to bend titanium, and a face that looked as if a rockslide had developed a permanent temper. His record was flawless, intimidating, and widely known. Over 4 decades, he had broken every recruit who arrived believing they were exceptional. Every single one. The Quellan prince who showed up with a personal guard was eliminated by the second week. The Zenther commando, who had verified kills before enrollment, was begging for his brood mother by day 5. The Thoth warrior poet, famous for composing long verses about her own brilliance, ultimately requested a medical withdrawal. Krever possessed a particular skill, a precise understanding of how to locate the smallest weakness in a person's defenses. He would apply pressure to that fault again and again until something essential gave way. At that point, the outcome was simple: they either became soldiers, or they were sent home. So, as expected, when the Human Exchange Program was announced, when the Terran Coalition declared it would be sending its top candidates to the Academy, Krever volunteered without hesitation. He signed up eagerly, almost happily, because he had already heard the stories. He knew the rumors about humans, pink-skinned, soft-bodied, supposedly delicate beings from a remote world that had only recently unlocked faster-than-light travel. A death world, they called it. Krever found that amusing. Krever had personally trained recruits from 6 officially classified death worlds before, and every single one of them eventually failed. Without exception. The human assigned to the program was named Maya Torres. When Krever reviewed her file for the first time, he didn't smile or scoff, he laughed. A deep, booming laugh that echoed through his office and startled his assistant, a tense Pixith named Din, who promptly dropped a full stack of datapads. Maya Torres, 5 feet 4 inches tall, 120 pounds, 22 years old. Prior military service, none. Combat training, limited to basic self-defense courses. Psychological assessment, stable, flexible, inquisitive. Her academy entry scores were acceptable, nothing more. Solid, but unremarkable. Nothing that suggested a natural soldier, much less a seasoned fighter. Krever studied the file, then glanced at the small, smiling face in the identification image. Brown eyes. Calm posture. Quiet confidence. He shook his head and thought, 3 days. Maybe 4 if she's persistent. He recorded it in his personal log, then filed it officially: human female. Exchange participant. Estimated washout window, 72 to 96 hours. He even placed bets with the other instructors. Real credits were exchanged. The over-under was set at 1 week, and Krever immediately took the under, so quickly it caught everyone's attention. When Maya Torres finally arrived at the academy, stepping off the transport with a single duffel bag and the same expression from her ID photo, Prevent Thor observed from his office window. She surveyed the station, the incoming recruits, dozens of species, all larger, stronger, and far more visibly built for combat. And then she smiled. Not subtly. Noticeably wider. Krever poured himself a drink. He assumed this would be entertaining. He was completely unprepared for what would follow. Day 1 began exactly as Krever had intended. He had prepared a flawless schedule, a carefully planned routine of controlled hardship. At 0600 hours, the recruits gathered inside the main training hall. Krever stood before them, all 4 arms folded, projecting an image that felt like judgment made physical. There were 63 recruits representing 42 different species, and 1 human position near the back, smiling as if she were attending a retreat instead of a military academy. "Welcome to hell," Krever announced. His voice carried effortlessly across the vast chamber. "For the next 16 weeks, you belong to me. Your comfort does not matter. Your feelings do not matter. Your past achievements no longer exist. You are nothing. You will become something, or you will leave, usually on a stretcher. It was a standard introduction. He had delivered it countless times. Most recruits responded as expected. The Vaxel twins were already perspiring, their chromatophores shifting into anxious colors. A Hyraxian in the front row had frozen completely. Even a Kaldorian, a species known for courage, looked as if he were questioning his decision to be there. Maya Torres, however, was doing something different. She was taking notes, actually typing on a datapad, recording Crever's speech as though it were a routine lecture on crop management. The first exercise was basic conditioning. And basic, by academy standards, meant extremely demanding by any normal metric. A 5-kilometer run under 1.2 standard gravity. For the average recruit, this should have meant roughly 40 minutes of sustained strain. Station Primus had adjustable gravity plating, and Crever preferred setting it just high enough to make recruits doubt the integrity of their bones. The Vaxel twins collapsed by the second kilometer. The Hyraxian reached the third before vomiting, which was particularly unpleasant given Hyraxian biology. 17 recruits failed to finish. 23 completed the run but needed medical support afterward. The remaining 23 crossed the line in varying states of complete exhaustion. Maya Torres finished in 31 minutes. Not first place, that went to a Christian named Vex, who had 3 legs and seemingly unlimited endurance, but she placed 5th overall. 5th out of 63, and she was barely winded. Nearby, a then warrior, genetically designed for combat, lay on the floor reflecting on ancestral disappointment. Meanwhile, the small human calmly performed cooldown stretches. Crever observed this closely, all 4 eyes narrowing. Fine. Endurance was not the full picture. Perhaps humans had efficient respiration. Perhaps their high-risk homeworld produced superior stamina. Strength would provide the real assessment. Next came strength training, the phase where less durable species usually failed. Not always physically, but certainly in confidence. The weights were calibrated precisely. Resistance machines were set to recruitment standards, levels designed to push each species to its maximum capacity. Crever moved between stations, watching recruits strain, tremble, and reach that critical moment of realization that they were not strong enough. Maya was assigned to the resistance press. According to her profile, the machine was set to 60% of the human baseline. She completed every repetition without issue. Then she paused, checked the display, frowned, and increased the resistance to 80%. She proceeded to complete another full set. A Pixith beside her was crying, actual tears, as he struggled with a load that should have been manageable for his species. The human, who should have been under visible strain, appeared only mildly inconvenienced. Torres, Crever said, his voice sharp enough to strip coating from metal. Do you think this is amusing? She looked up, clearly confused. No, sir. The machine settings seemed incorrect for my body mass, sir. Incorrect, Crever repeated, the word clearly unpleasant to him. Yes, sir. Too light, sir. A nearby Kaldorian released a sound like air escaping a damaged seal. Kaldorans were known for exceptional strength. They evolved under intense gravity. And this human, this seemingly fragile, pink-skinned being, had just casually stated that Academy standard resistance was insufficient. By day 3, they entered the gravity chamber. This was Crever's preferred environment, a rotating facility where gravitational force steadily increased while recruits navigated obstacle courses. It began at standard gravity and continued to rise steadily. Most species reached their limit around 1.5 times standard gravity. Only the rare few managed 1.8. Prever's personal best was 2.3, a number he regarded with deep pride. Recruits entered the chamber in groups of 5. The first group, all from standard gravity worlds, started confidently. By 1.4, they were crawling. At 1.6, they were finished. Medics had to remove them. The second group followed the same pattern. The third group included a thrust species who reached 1.7 before her legs completely failed beneath her. Then it was Maya's group. The gravity began increasing again. 1.2, 1.4, 1.6. Her 4 teammates were done, hitting their panic buttons and struggling to breathe. Maya continued forward, still clearing obstacles. Her pace had slowed, and her movements were more controlled, but she did not stop. 1.8, 1.9, 2.0. Prever rose to his feet, all 4 hands gripping the observation railing. 2.1. She stumbled. Finally. This was it. She would quit. She would press the button and acknowledge her limit. Instead, she caught herself, forced herself upright, and continued moving. 2.2. Shut it down, Prever ordered. Sir, the technician replied. The Quellan looked uncertain. I said shut it down. Now. The gravity dropped back to normal. Maya stood in the center of the chamber, breathing heavily, far more heavily than before, sweat pouring off her body, but still standing. She looked toward the observation window with an expression that was not quite disappointment, as if she had hoped to see how much further she could have gone. That night, Graver reviewed the footage. He watched it repeatedly. He pulled up baseline human data, compared it with Maya's medical records, and slowly, very slowly, a cold sensation formed in his stomach. Earth's gravity, 1 standard. Atmosphere, oxygen-rich, but within acceptable limits. Evolutionary path, not strength. Persistence. Predators. Endurance hunters. A species that evolved by chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. A species that considered running 26 miles a recreational activity. A species capable of producing adrenaline, a natural combat stimulant. Naturally, when threatened, Gravidor poured himself another drink, much larger than the last. This situation was not unfolding as planned. Not even close. And this is where Crever made his second mistake. His first error was assuming Maya would fail physically. His second was believing he could break her mind. When physical conditioning produced no results, when this human continued forward without slowing, like some relentless biological engine, Prevator chose to escalate. He shifted tactics, moving directly into psychological warfare, as humans would phrase it. Psychological conditioning at the academy was never designed for resilience alone. It was intentionally severe. The previous year, 3 recruits had experienced complete mental collapse during these trials. The simulations were built by active military psychologists, specialists in fear response drawn from more than 100 different species. They understood exactly how to trigger panic, how to activate ancient survival fears embedded deep within each species' collective memory. Darkness for species shaped as prey. Tight confinement for those evolved on open terrain. Total isolation for hive-based intelligences. Each scenario was engineered with precision and delivered without mercy. Week 2. Day 1. Creventher personally authorized Maya's initial psychological assessment, standard terror protocol. She was placed inside the pod, neural interface connected, and the program initiated. The scenario simulated being hunted in darkness by a larger, faster predator driven by hunger. Across testing, this scenario triggered panic responses in 97% of species. The Vaxel twins lasted 4 minutes before screaming for extraction. A Kthian warrior, one from Creventher's own species, endured 11 minutes before his stress indicators reached critical levels. Maya Torres completed the full 30-minute session, finishing the entire program. When technicians removed her from the pod, they expected visible distress, shaking, tears, some outward sign of psychological strain. Instead, she adjusted to the light and calmly asked, "Is there a level 2? The lead technician, Chorus, who had overseen these simulations for 8 years, could only stare. "That was level 4, recruit Torres." Maya paused, considering this. "Oh," she said. "It was sort of like camping back home. Except the thing chasing me was slower." Creventher reviewed her biometric data himself. Her heart rate had increased. Her adrenaline levels had spiked. All expected. But then came the troubling detail: both metrics stabilized while the threat continued. While she remained under simulated mortal danger. Her body adjusted as if the experience were physical exertion. "Exercise. Training. Run the void scenario," Creventher ordered. His voice carried slightly less certainty this time, just enough for his assistant, Dren, to notice and make a quiet note in his private records. The void scenario was different. Unique. It combined sensory deprivation with temporal distortion. Complete isolation in infinite darkness, where time lost coherence. Minutes stretched into hours. Hours blurred into days. The purpose was not fear alone, but existential pressure, forcing the subject to confront insignificance in an indifferent universe. Philosophical terror, refined into a tool. The endurance record stood at 42 minutes, held by a Zenthari monk trained for decades in disciplined meditation. Maya was placed in the chamber. The seal closed. Protocols activated. 42 minutes passed. Then an hour. Then 2. Monitoring staff repeatedly checked the systems, convinced a malfunction had occurred. Everything was functioning normally. She remained alone in total darkness, her vital signs steady, remarkably so. Neural activity suggested active thought, even focus, but no panic. No breakdown. At the 3-hour mark, Creventher personally opened the chamber. Maya squinted at the light, stretched slightly, and said, "That was interesting. It gave me time to think about my training schedule. I think I've been neglecting core work." Chorus, the simulation technician, later filed a formal complaint. He stated that either his equipment was defective or humans themselves were fundamentally flawed, and he required clarification before continuing further tests. What no one at the academy understood at that moment was this: the problem was neither the equipment nor the protocols. It was the assumptions they were built on. What Crever was only beginning to understand, with a slow rise of real fear, was this: humans were not merely from a death world. The phrase death world was common across the galaxy. Many planets were dangerous. Many had predators, violent climates, and harsh living conditions. But Earth was different. Earth was extreme. Humans evolved alongside creatures that could only be described as nightmares. Not a single apex predator, but dozens, hundreds. Beings with claws, fangs, venom, and hunting methods refined over millions of years. And yet humans, soft, without claws, without fangs, survived. More than that, they flourished. They became the apex predator themselves, not through raw strength, but through an almost unreasonable refusal to die. They were persistence hunters, capable of tracking prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. They hunted in groups, using complex communication to coordinate actions. They were omnivores, able to eat nearly anything and adapt to almost any climate. But beyond all of that, there was something more important. Cultural evolution. Humans told stories. And not just comforting ones. They told stories designed to frighten themselves, horror stories, ghost tales, narratives filled with monsters, darkness, and death. For entertainment, they created entire artistic genres meant to activate fear, and then chose to consume that content again and again for pleasure. For thousands of years, they had been conditioning themselves against terror. So when Kathirer placed Maya into the fear isolation chamber, the Academy's ultimate tool, reserved for elite special forces training, she was not unprepared. She had been preparing her entire life. Every horror movie she watched as a teenager. Every scary campfire story. Every true crime podcast, thriller novel, and video game built around sudden threats emerging from darkness. All of it was training. Unintentional, recreational training for this exact situation. The chamber itself was straightforward, pure phobia activation. It scanned the subject's brain, identified their deepest fears, and projected them in detailed holographic form. Spiders for those afraid of them. Heights for those who feared falling. Social failure for those with anxiety. It was tailored nightmare material, and it carried a 99.4% psychological breakdown rate within 20 minutes. Maya was placed inside at 0800 hours, week 2, day 4. By 0900, other instructors had gathered outside. By 1000, Academy Command was monitoring the live feeds. By 1100, someone had started a betting pool on when she would break. She never did. 6 hours. A full 6 hours in the chamber, facing holographic projections of her worst fears, whatever they were. The system never disclosed specifics. That data was confidential. When the door was finally opened, more due to concerns about equipment limits than concern for her well-being, Maya stepped out, looked at Creether, and said something that would be repeated in staff meetings for years. "Sir, I appreciate the training, but that was basically just exposure therapy. My insurance back home doesn't cover that, so, thanks, I guess." Chorus resigned the following day. No delay. He submitted his resignation and accepted a position at a civilian research facility studying plant psychology or something equally harmless. In his exit interview, he stated, and this was officially recorded, "I spent 8 years learning how to break minds. That human is unbreakable. I am not prepared for this. No one is prepared for this." Crever began drinking earlier in the day after that. He started reviewing xenobiology texts on human evolution. And for the first time in 43 teaching cycles, he questioned whether he was suited for this role at all. Because Maya Torres was not simply passing his tests. She was barely registering them. Week 3 was approaching. Week 3, when the situation became genuinely serious. Academy staff had begun to talk quietly, low conversations in hallways, uneasy looks toward the human recruit. Someone, likely Din, had started backing up all training footage to secure servers, just in case. Just in case events moved in a direction that required records, or discretion. Week 3 marked the start of the breaking point exercise. Now, it's important to explain what this actually meant, because calling it an exercise was misleading. It was like calling a supernova a light display, technically correct, but far from sufficient. The breaking point was not part of the standard curriculum. It wasn't even advanced training. This was the program used to identify candidates for black operations, deep space reconnaissance, and missions where failure meant death, and success meant surviving long enough to live with the consequences. In 43 cycles, Crever had authorized this exercise only 11 times. 11. Across those attempts, 62 recruits participated. 41 failed almost immediately, requesting transfers, medical withdrawals, or outright removal. 18 completed the exercise but were permanently altered by it. Only 3 passed without qualification. Just 3. Those individuals later became elite Special Forces operators and were now the most decorated soldiers in their respective species' militaries. The concept was simple, though the execution was brutal. 20 recruits from multiple species were deployed into a simulated combat environment filled with active hazards, minimal supplies, and a single objective: survive for 72 hours. There were no win conditions. No enemy to defeat. Survival itself was the task, while everything, without exception, worked against them. The simulation took place in Dome 7, a massive facility capable of reproducing nearly any environment. For this scenario, Crever selected dense jungle terrain with Earth-like gravity and atmosphere. The intention was clear: allow Maya a sense of familiarity before applying pressure. The environment included toxic rain capable of burning through standard armor, aggressive indigenous fauna, and full sensory feedback through neural interfaces. Pain was real. Temperature shifts ranged from 40 degrees Celsius during the day to -20 at night. There was one additional factor. The recruits were not alone. Automated hunter drones were deployed, combat units equipped with adaptive AI designed to track, intimidate, and neutralize targets. They were not permitted to kill, safety protocols were active. However, they could incapacitate, injure, and push recruits to their limits. At 0600 hours, 20 recruits entered Dome 7. The group was diverse: 2 Crithians, 3 Thin Warriors, 4 Calderans, 1 Zenthori, 5 Quellan, 2 Pixith, 2 Horaxians, and 1 human. Maya was still smiling, though that expression had shifted over the past 3 weeks. It was no longer naive. It carried awareness, as if she understood something the others did not. Krebther observed from the control room, surrounded by monitoring systems, medical teams on standby, and every senior instructor at the academy. The rumors had spread: the human who could not be broken. Everyone wanted to see the outcome. Hour 1 focused on reconnaissance. The recruits dispersed, some forming small teams, others choosing isolation. The priorities were standard: locate water, establish shelter, avoid detection by drones. Maya chose to operate alone, moving through the jungle canopy with notable efficiency. She had clearly absorbed the wilderness survival training, thoroughly. At hour 6, the first drone engagement occurred. A Pixith recruit named Ren wandered into a patrol zone. The drone activated, weapons live. Ren panicked and fled. Panic, as always, impaired judgment. Ren ran directly into a ravine, sustaining multiple fractures in one leg. Medical extraction followed. 1 recruit removed. 19 remained. By hour 12, temperatures dropped sharply. The toxic rain began. Recruits scrambled to find cover. The Calderans, to their credit, attempted to construct a shared shelter. The effort was respectable, but it failed within 20 minutes. They were evacuated shortly after, suffering only minor chemical burns. 4 recruits eliminated, 16 remaining. By hour 18, night had fallen, and this marked the moment when Maya Torres stopped functioning as a standard recruit and transitioned into something entirely different. Something that caused Crever to rise from his chair, all 4 hands tightening around the console as he murmured, "What in the void is she doing?" Maya had not merely endured the first 18 hours. She had adapted and advanced. While other recruits stayed hidden, conserving energy and treating the test as a passive survival exercise, Maya had taken a different approach. She went on the offensive. She began hunting. She tracked a patrol drone, studied its movement cycle, and constructed a trap, an actual trap, using local materials, cabling from her equipment harness, and an improvised shaped charge assembled from emergency flares. The drone entered the trap, the charge detonated, and the unit was disabled in a shower of sparks. Maya moved through the darkness with practiced efficiency, salvaging the drone's power cell and 2 weapon modules. One of the observing instructors, Grios, spoke slowly. "That is not protocol. That is not defensive survival. That is offensive behavior." Grethor corrected him, his voice flat. "She is hunting them." By hour 24, 3 more recruits were removed. 1 Inthuri succumbed to hypothermia. 2 Quellan mentally disengaged and requested extraction. 13 remained. Maya had by then disabled 2 additional drones. She had established what could only be described as a forward base, stockpiled resources, and then took the action that led to the footage being classified. She began coordinating the other recruits. The remaining warriors eventually discovered her camp. They anticipated confrontation or competition over supplies. Instead, Maya offered shared resources, shelter, and direction. She outlined the situation clearly. The drones follow patterns, she explained, the audio feed capturing every word. They are predictable. We can either hide for 3 days, or we can neutralize them and make this area secure. Decide. Veterans from disciplined martial cultures stood facing a small human coated in mud and drone residue, holding improvised weapons. And they chose to follow her. Within 6 hours, Maya had organized 8 of the remaining recruits into a functional unit. They were no longer merely enduring conditions. They were managing territory, setting ambushes, and disabling drones through coordinated action. Creveter observed as his carefully engineered scenario was dismantled methodically by a human who, by all projections, should have been isolated and defensive. The control room fell completely silent. Every observer reached the same conclusion at once. A fundamental miscalculation had been made. By hour 48, 12 drones were offline. 5 more recruits had withdrawn, unable to cope with the sustained pressure, even with Maya's structure in place. But the remaining 8, under her leadership, were no longer reacting. They were advancing. What had been designed as a survival exercise had evolved into an organized combat operation. They had shelters, weapon systems, and a clear command hierarchy, with Maya at its center. "Sir," Dren said quietly from beside Crever, "should we escalate the scenario? Increase drone numbers? Adjust parameters?" Crever did not respond immediately. He watched the displays as Maya instructed a Haraxian on snare placement, briefed an Aquelan on patrol routes, moved through the camp checking readiness, assigning roles, and maintaining control. There was something in her movement, efficient, deliberate, focused, that made Creveter finally understand the mistake they had made. Humans were not simply resilient. They were not merely persistent. They were cooperative apex hunters who performed best under stress, who became steadier as situations worsened, and who had spent thousands of years in their evolutionary past pursuing prey that was smarter, faster, and stronger than they were, surviving by being more coordinated, more flexible, and more relentlessly determined than anything else on their hostile homeworld. "No," Crever said at last. "No changes. Let it continue." Hour 72 arrived. 8 recruits exited Dome 7. They were clearly worn down. Yes, dirty. Without question. But they were moving on their own strength. More importantly, they were leaving as a unit. Maya Torres led them. When she saw Crever standing at the dome entrance, she raised her hand in a formal military salute, clean, exact, disciplined. "Exercise complete, sir. 8 recruits present. 17 drones neutralized. No fatalities. Request permission to clean up and proceed to debrief." Creveter returned the salute by instinct, granting approval without hesitation. As the recruits moved past him toward medical evaluation, one of the slimmer warriors paused, looked directly at Crever, and said something that would remain with the instructor for the rest of his service. "Sir, with respect, she should be placed in command of this academy. We would all become better soldiers because of it." That evening, Crever completed his incident report. He documented every event, every action that defied expectation, every belief about training and control that had proven incorrect, and every moment his long-held understanding of military preparation had been overturned. At the bottom of the report, he added a single recommendation: initiate a full reassessment of human integration protocols before additional Terran Coalition personnel arrive. Current training parameters are inadequate and may pose risks. 3 days later, Academy Command classified the footage, secured it in restricted archives, and quietly reassigned Crever to an instructional role at a remote satellite campus, one where he would never again oversee a human recruit. The official explanation was routine rotation. The actual reason was simpler. They had seen what he saw. They understood what he understood. Humans were fundamentally different, and the galaxy was not prepared to fully recognize how different. Not yet. Possibly never. The footage review took place in a sealed room, locked, without exception. Access required command-level clearance. 5 Academy officials were present, including Commander Thress, a 400-year-old Quellan veteran of 3 galactic wars, widely regarded as someone beyond surprise. They viewed 72 hours of recordings in accelerated format. They watched Maya Torres convert a failing exercise into an organized military operation. They observed her plan, coordinate, and command. They saw her track and eliminate combat drones the way her ancestors once hunted mammoths across the African plains. Midway through the review, Commander Thress halted the playback. He remained still, silent, for a long moment. Then, with deliberate care, he asked a single question. "How many humans did the Terran Coalition say they were sending to our armies?" 200. Someone replied, "Over the next 5 cycles, across all major training facilities." Thress gave a slow nod. "And they were all like this?" No one spoke, because no one truly knew. Maya Torres might have been extraordinary even by human standards, or she might have been completely, disturbingly average. That uncertainty, the simple fact of not knowing, was what unsettled them most. Classify it, Therese ordered. All of it. Every recording, every biometric scan, every incident report. Omega-level clearance. And I want a full xenopsychology assessment of human combat behavior before we approve another Terran recruit. We need to understand what we're facing. Sir, one of the officials said. It was a Christian admiral named Cross. If we classify this material, we won't be able to use it for training. This footage demonstrates exceptional small unit tactics, leadership under pressure, adaptive problem solving. It's exactly the kind of... I know exactly what it shows, Vikros, Therese cut in. It shows that we designed a program meant to break the strongest warriors in the galaxy, and a human turned it into something resembling a routine team exercise. It shows that our models of stress response, fear, and psychological limits do not apply to Terrans. And if that information becomes public, if every species in the coalition sees how easily a human moved through our most extreme protocols, what do you think happens to the Academy's reputation? No one answered. Because he was right. The Galactic Military Academy's status was built on its image as the harshest, most demanding training institution in known space. If word spread that a human, a species barely a century into galactic civilization, had walked through their worst scenarios with ease, that image would collapse. Recruitment would fall. Funding would dry up. Political oversight would intensify. So they buried the evidence. It was sealed in archives requiring 3 separate authorization codes and biometric verification to access. It was removed from standard databases. New directives were issued. Any recording of human recruits in extreme training environments required direct command approval. Crever's transfer orders arrived within a week. He didn't resist or argue. He packed his personal effects, his commendations, his teaching awards, and left Station Primus without ceremony. His reassignment placed him at a quiet training outpost near the Outer Rim, instructing municipal security forces in basic hand-to-hand combat. For someone of his rank and experience, it was a severe demotion. He accepted it without complaint. Because Crever had already understood something the Academy leadership was still trying to process. Humans were dangerous, not despite their physical fragility, but because of it. They lacked natural armor, so they engineered it. They had no built-in weapons, so they created their own. Their lifespans were short, so they achieved more in a few decades than other species managed in centuries. They were weak, so they refused to remain that way. Every evolutionary disadvantage became motivation. Every limitation became fuel. Most concerning of all, humans were deeply social. They didn't just survive alone, they excelled together. Maya hadn't merely completed the breaking point exercise. She had formed an effective military unit from exhausted, frightened recruits in less than 48 hours. That wasn't training behavior. That was instinct, millions of years of evolution reinforcing the idea that humans, working together, were exceptionally hard to stop. At his new post, Crever would sometimes drink, often more than one, and talk to other instructors about the human cadet. They dismissed his accounts as exaggeration, as stories shaped by stress or pride. No one could be that adaptable, that resilient, that consistently capable. Eventually, he stopped trying to persuade them. Let them believe what they wanted. He knew the reality. And the reality was that humans were not simply another species entering the galactic community. They were something entirely new. Survivors of a death world who had reached the top of their ecosystem through intelligence, cooperation, and an absolute refusal to quit. Now they had arrived among the stars, ready to demonstrate to the rest of the galaxy what persistence truly meant. Maya Torres graduated quietly. No ceremony, no fanfare, just the standard honors. She received her commission, got her assignment, and deployed to her first posting without any special attention. The Academy didn't announce that she had completed every training protocol flawlessly, nor did they mention that she had turned their ultimate test into a lesson in leadership. In fact, they said almost nothing at all. She was assigned to a Joint Coalition Task Force, a multi-seas unit handling high-risk operations, positions usually reserved for veterans with decades of experience. Her commanding officer was a Zenther colonel named Thresh. He had specifically requested in writing that if any human recruits passed through the Academy, he wanted them on his team. Thresh had read the classified report. He had watched the buried footage. He had seen what Maya Torres could do when everything was working against her, and he thought, yes. I want that on my side when things go wrong, because things always go wrong. That was military life. The question was never if you would face impossible situations, the question was how you would respond. Humans seemed to respond by simply getting to work. When asked about the human exchange program, the official Academy statement was always the same: professional, diplomatic human recruits are adapting well to our training protocols. We look forward to continued cooperation with the Terran Coalition. What they never said, and would never say, was that the protocols weren't built for humans. Humans didn't adapt to the protocols, they revealed the protocol's limits. Every assumption the galaxy had about stress, fear, and breaking points had to be reconsidered now that humans were involved. They didn't mention that. Instead, they smiled, nodded, quietly updated training manuals, added new sections, warnings, and protocols specifically for Terran recruits, and locked away the footage of Maya Torres in the archives, where it would gather digital dust. A hidden reminder: sometimes the scariest thing in the galaxy isn't the monsters. It's the ones who face the monsters and ask, "Is that all you've got?" That is the story. The story the Academy doesn't want anyone to know. The story buried under layers of classification and bureaucracy because it was too revealing, too unsettling to release publicly. And yes, I know what you're thinking. How did I get access? How do I know these details? Let's just say I have friends in archives, and friends who owe me favors. Some secrets are too valuable to remain hidden forever. Where are they now, you ask? Creever is still teaching on that Outer Rim station. Last I heard, he's quite content. Less pressure, smaller classes, and students who break when they're supposed to break. He's started writing a book, working title Understanding Death World Psychology, a survival guide for instructors. No publisher yet. Probably never will be, too honest, too revealing, but he writes it anyway. A therapeutic process, I suppose, to get all those thoughts out. Maya Torres? She's doing perfectly fine. That task force she joined has completed 17 high-risk operations in 3 years. 17. And their success rate? Flawless. Absolutely flawless. If you speak to any of the non-human members of that unit, they will tell you the same thing: they trust her completely, without hesitation. Because when everything goes wrong, when a mission falls apart, when even the most careful planning descends into chaos, Maya Torres has this look, a calm, focused, almost content expression. And then she begins her work, and somehow, against all odds, everyone makes it home. She earned the rank of captain last cycle, the youngest in her unit. Rumors, unconfirmed, of course, say that Terran Coalition Command is monitoring her career closely, building a file. Perhaps she is exactly the kind of officer humanity will need when the time comes to prove itself on the galactic stage. At the Academy, they admitted 43 additional human recruits over the next 3 cycles. 43. And here's the part that still makes me laugh at night: every single one of them graduated. All of them. Some struggled more than others. Not all were as naturally skilled as Maya, but every single recruit made it through. Once you realize that humans do not break the same way other species do, and adjust your expectations, they are actually surprisingly easy to train. Terrifyingly easy. Other instructors, the ones who didn't get the memo, the ones unaware of the hidden footage, learned the hard way. They tried to break their human recruits using the same tactics Crever had used, and got the same results: confusion, frustration, and slowly dawning horror. There's now an informal support group for instructors who have trained humans, a space to process how profoundly the experience reshaped their perspective. They meet twice a month, and attendance keeps growing. So here's my advice, free of charge, to any instructor, commander, or military professional who might work with human recruits or soldiers in the future: do not try to break them. You cannot. Human evolution is a long story of things trying to break them, and failing. Ice ages, predators, diseases, each other, they survived it all. Your toughest training program will not change that. Instead, give them a challenge. Set an objective. Then step back and watch. They will surprise you. They will accomplish things you never thought possible. They will find solutions you never imagined. And they will do it with an infuriating, cheerful determination that makes you wonder if they even realize the task was supposed to be impossible. They understand. They just don't care. For humans, impossibility is never a barrier. It is a test, an invitation, a provocation. And humans have never, ever refused a provocation. And there is one more detail worth noting. That footage, the classified recordings showing Maya Torres tearing through the breaking point exercise, was copied. Not once, but many times. Those files are out there now, circulating quietly through the shadowed layers of military intelligence systems. I have seen clips used in training drills that, on paper, never took place. I have heard them mentioned in tactical briefings that were never officially logged. The Academy attempted to erase the footage, yes, but nothing truly disappears once enough people know it exists. Somewhere at this very moment, an instructor at some distant academy is watching a small human take what was designed as a nightmare scenario and turn it into a structured training sequence. And for the first time, they are likely beginning to understand that humanity's arrival into the galactic community was not simply another species joining the coalition. It was the food chain gaining a new apex presence. One that can smile, coordinate, and refuse to stop. Sleep well, Academy command. Sleep well. The humans are here now, and they arrived carrying their Deathworld instincts with them.